I'm a staunch believer in Murphy's Law. If you see the light in the end of a tunnel, I always assume it's an oncoming train. I find that very wise. Well, since I'm a representative of a publicly founded public service radio, then business models are not what I do. So I will take a slightly different approach and talk about challenges and threats in the new media landscape, adhering to my principle of following always Murphy's Law. I guess we've already heard a lot today on the possibilities in the new media landscape, and I will talk about the threats. And now, let's go to the movies. Let's go. This is the pride of Swedish Air Force, our latest fighter jet, JAS Gripen. We're trying to sell it all over the world. Now try to see yourself as the plane is you in the old media, and the blue or rather grey skies, the new media landscape that you try to handle. The pilot survived, by the way. He survived to crash again a couple of years later in another JAS Gripen. Put it back, please. Sorry. For you, the few of you who read Swedish, you know that the right poster there says that the steering system probably caused the crash of the JAS. And it was actually true. Because this plane is a very modern, totally unstable plane, flying only by the help of computers. It can't fly 1 inch without the help of computers. The problem in the beginning was that the computers were too good, too accurate. So the pilot couldn't handle it, and the computers misunderstood the pilot. One politician in Sweden called this plane the world's most expensive rotary cultivator. The problem was that the computers misunderstood the pilot's moves. The computer tried to compensate that. The pilot didn't like what the computers were doing, so he compensated back and so forth. And it crashed. This is, since then, a standard example in classes in automatic control engineering. So, oversimplified, you guess where I'm heading? To the problem with matching man and machine, man and technique. And it might be something to think about how we handle the new, wonderful, technically advanced media landscape. Yesterday, I read an article in one of the tabloids in Sweden. The editor-in-chief was defending a decision on publishing the identity of a suspected arsonist. It's a very famous story in Sweden. And normally, we don't do that. We've got very strict ethical rules in Sweden, so we normally do not publish names of suspects. And what I found very interesting in this article was that one of the main arguments that this guy, the editor-in-chief, used was that the name and identity of the suspected arsonist was to be found all over the net anyway, which made him, it was easier for him then to publish this also in paper. This is just a very minor example of what I've been thinking about since a few years back, and what I found both as a journalist and as a media manager, perhaps the most challenging in the new media landscape? How do you uphold your ethical and professional standards when the environment has changed completely? You touched about this problem in the earlier session, but I'm going to talk a bit more about it too. Because the problem is, of course, that if we fail, what would be the consequences? At least in my country, the media landscape is largely self-regulated. We got the oldest constitution of press freedom in the world, and it's truly very, very liberal. So instead, the media has taken on self-imposed restrictions, and it has so far been working fairly well. The lawmakers have largely kept their fingers away. But what happens if this self-regulation system starts to fail? I'm quite worried, because my guess is that the regulators will come storming in. And there is actually such a case in Sweden right now. There's a bill to the parliament proposing that some kind of pictures will be outlawed. The background to this bill is, I would say, mobile phone cameras, because the bill tries to address the problem with insulting or humiliating pictures being published on the web. So the intentions are respectable, though I suspect it will not work. But, however, from a media perspective, this completely changes the fundamental rules of responsibility in the Swedish media landscape. It's actually quite serious. Up till now, there is, as you know, one and only one person who is legally responsible for what's being published in Swedish media, and it's a legally responsible editor. This bill, however, is very strange. It suggests that the photographer should be legally responsible for the picture being published in, for example, the newspaper. So, if a paper, a TV, or a website publishes a picture that are put in question, the authorities will start hunting down the photographer, not the editor. A complete change of the Swedish media landscape. This issue is being very hotly debated, always engaged in the question along almost all other publishers in the country. But this is just one problem that might happen in the new media landscape if we do not watch our backs. There are a lot of other examples, and I fear that we have only seen the beginning of the rather hopeless task to regulate the new media landscape. So I'll move to what I think is the biggest threat when it comes to how we handle the new media landscape, and it's the need for speed. Since I work for the radio, I'll use a radio perspective. It was not long ago that radio was the only truly live medium. We had the advantage of speed. In almost every situation, we could be confident that we would be on air talking to our listeners hours ahead of all other competitors. And this advantage gave us the possibility and the responsibility to develop tools to handle all the risks that are involved in instant news reporting. So we developed sets of rules, ethical rules, and professional standards aimed at avoiding the temptations of speed before truth. So now, Ove, it's time for a little bit of bragging. You talked also about the eroding trust in the last session. That does not go for Swedish radio. Without any competition, we are the most trusted media in the country. I think it's around 86% of the respondents have trust or very great trust for the way Swedish radio is doing their job. And we are not only the most trusted media, we are also the most trusted organization companies and the parliament and universities, everything included, Swedish radio is the most trusted. There is, however, we lost 3 years ago, we lost to today's number 2. And it says a lot about Swedes, I think. 3 years ago, the most trusted organization, entity in Sweden was the furniture company IKEA. But now we are ahead of IKEA again. So the question is, of course, have we been able to establish this position because we did not have any competitors in speed? That you have to ask yourself. And if that is the case, how do we handle the new media environment, and what professional risks are involved in the competition to be first? The sad fact is that if we work in the traditional way, checking, double-checking, triple-checking before publishing, we will almost always be lost in the news line, which is terrible for a news reporter. I could give you several examples where we finally was right and everybody else was wrong, but I think I bragged enough. So I just give you one example on where we made a rather grave mistake. It's from the coverage of the murder of our foreign minister, Anna Lindh. I was director of news at that time, and on the morning of her death, we were all being kept in the dark by the government. They kept the news of her death secret for more than 3 hours, which I think is a scandal, since it was the foreign minister. So the last bulletin early in the morning said that the foreign minister had undergone surgery, her condition was critical, but the general feeling was that there were good chances of recovery. Anna Lindh died 29 minutes past 5 in the morning, and we didn't know anything until around almost 9 o'clock in the morning. So it was very tense in the newsroom. And suddenly there was a news flash from Swedish news agency, not a communique, just a flash, Anna Lindh is dead. And then, according to our principles and rules, we started checking. We need, of course, our own confirmation. That's a basic rule. And then, to my horror, I heard my own current affairs program reading from the screen that the Swedish news agency now says that Anna Lindh is dead. And that is absolutely contrary to all our rules and regulations. And this is, I would say, connected to the development in the new media landscape, because news reporters and editors are more or less very nervous when you see information coming in from left and right and page after web page present news that you haven't got confirmed yet. So, of course, it was my fault. I should have issued specific instructions how we would act in different circumstances. I forgot that, and it's a dark moment, I must say, in my own journalistic history. However, the interesting thing is that a couple of years ago, such instructions would not have been needed, because that everybody would have known that we do not kill foreign ministers without our own confirmation. So, to sum up, I see a clear tendency towards a web-driven shift in ethical and professional standards. And interestingly, I see changes also in the web editions of traditional media. It's quite obvious, at least in Sweden, that traditional print media in some cases have one set of rules for print and another set of rules for the web. Editors have actually told me so. And seemingly is this based on the view that you don't have to overcheck your story on the web, since you always can correct it in real time. which I find quite disastrous. So, this has created a new and potentially very damaging situation in media. And I think that might be the reason that trust is falling. When a story seems to be breaking everywhere, it's tempting to do one double check less. Of course, we will still do that extra double check, but as I said earlier, it's a heavy price to pay, because we will find ourselves being last to publish the news in the 99% of all the stories that in the end turns out to have been correct from the beginning. And this is very, very difficult for a news journalist to accept. But the alternatives, I think, are worse. Thank you very much.